Welcome back. Well, like I mentioned earlier when I was introducing Kent, in the process of preparing for this event, I also had the pleasure of getting to know Ellen Bristol much better. And she is spunky and full of life and passion. It's just really amazing. So she's just a wonderful woman. So Ellen started her consulting practice thinking she would consult with individual nonprofits and small businesses, but soon found herself building methodologies, conducting research studies, and writing books on her work. Today, she is the proud developer of Fundraising the Smart Way, a fundraising practice combining research, technology, and innovative management practices to bring about predictable, consistent income growth. Her research project, the Leaky Bucket Assessment for Effective Fundraising, is the largest popular study of fundraising staff productivity. She has written several books and many articles, white papers, and benchmarking studies on fundraising productivity. Today, we'll learn how to set clear, documented performance expectations that will improve our fundraising results. Please join me in welcoming Ellen.
I should be on now. Yay. Thank you for that generous introduction. And if you want to remember it, it's in the program notes. This is going to be real different from what we talked about earlier today. I'd also like to dedicate this speech to an important American, Chuck Berry. You know, I speak a lot at conferences and where have you, and on webinars and things like that. And I rarely have to follow two such great speakers, and I just thought, oh God. And then I had to follow Kent. So fortunately, the topic is very different, but the juncture between what Helen talked about and what Kent talked about are going to be very meaningful to you. So first of all, this is me. Now you know what I look like. And this is what this whole thing's about. What we find in fundraising organizations is an awful lot of running around like a chicken without a head, an awful lot of time wasted on many non-productive things, and a great deal of call reluctance, and a whole lot of things. I'm a little bit unusual among fundraising consultants because I may be the only person in the industry who never worked in a fundraising shop. So I'm a total interloper. I did, however, have a 20-year career selling mainframe computers. And I learned a lot of things, the last of which was, boy, am I glad to get out of this industry. And I worked for huge corporations. So when I opened my consulting practice, I was surprised that it was easy for me to get nonprofit clients. And one of the things I left my former career with was a big question. What's wrong with sales? That was my question. I did a great job. I loved my clients. I raised a lot of money, or I, sold, millions and millions of dollars worth of fancy schmancy computer equipment that nobody understood. So So why was I unhappy? Why were my peers always miserable? And why was sales management always in huge stress? And I just kept thinking about that after I left. Was it this? Was it that? Was it this? Was it that? And bit by bit, I started to put stuff together. Another consultant colleague of mine was an expert in business process management. A few months after I opened my practice, she recruited me to be the second on a massive project with a big box-making company to do process development. I said to her, I don't know, what do I know, you know? She said, don't worry, I'll teach you. I just don't want to do it alone. So as soon as I started to read the classic process management literature, who in this room has ever heard of TQM, Total Quality Management, Six Sigma, Lean? Okay, all of these things go way back to World War II with Dr. W. Edwards Deming's discoveries about total quality management. And I realized, hey, that's what's wrong with sales. There's no business process in place. There are no classic formal expectations. The metrics are lousy. And like Helen said this morning, your reward for success is being punished by having your quota raised. And your punishment for failure is losing your job. So I thought, there's something about this that doesn't compute. And all of a sudden, I find myself with all these nonprofit clients. And I'm looking at their ways of generating income. I wasn't even thinking about it as fundraising, because in my book, fundraising tends to imply a somewhat narrow range of behaviors. And I started to look at the issue from an executive perspective. What does it take to fund the business operation of a nonprofit at a level that accommodates predictable, consistent income growth so that you can have, like Kent was just saying, the shingles and the plumbing and the well-trained staff who aren't paid poverty wages. Who in this room would like a raise? Okay. So when you boil it all down, fundraising is one of the biggest issues that arises in capacity building. And we don't have a lot of techniques to build the capacity of the revenue generating function in a nonprofit. Does that make sense to people, what I'm trying to say? So, and this is one of the outcomes. And I know you guys have experienced this. The development officer has spent 3.5 years trying to cultivate Mrs. Moneybags, who very happily goes out to lunch 5 times a year on your nickel, but really doesn't have any intention of giving you any money at all, or any significant money. So, I actually came up with the methodology first, and then I invented the leaky bucket assessment, because I said to myself, if we're going to have a methodology, you can only prove the merits of a methodology if you can measure that there's a need for it. And that's when I invented the leaky bucket assessment. And I'm very, very pleased that about 30% of you completed your assessments. Raise your hands. Petra was one of the, I think it's a real easy assessment. Petra said, oh boy, this is really hard. And I was surprised to discover that nobody had done that research before. Evidently, without doing a graduate student literature study, there had been no popular studies of staff fundraising productivity. There's a ton of research, as you all know, about donor behavior and market research and this and that and the other, and Giving USA, and I could go on and on. But there's not much about how productive or non-productive the fundraising staff may be. And by the way, I include volunteers in that term, fundraising staff. You don't have to be paid to be part of the fundraising staff. So I launched this assessment in April 2011. We now have over 1,100 samples in the data set, which means, guess what? I actually created a statistically significant study. I'm so proud of myself. And I collated your final scores from most of you. I wasn't able to include the scores that came, the assessment scores that came in yesterday and today, sorry. But guess what? You guys are right in line with global averages. In other words, according to the 9 disciplines that we measure, which either contribute to or detract from productivity in the fundraising function of your nonprofit, about 76% of organizations fall below the midpoint. So the median point of this study means the industry as a whole gets a rousing D+. Anybody surprised by that? It's pretty sad. So we know how difficult it is to raise money. Anybody in here think it's easy to raise money? Last I checked. But we're standing in our own way by failing to adopt certain techniques, which I'm going to share with you. And I thought you might get a kick out of an infographic we put together at the 700 sample mark. These are some of my favorite factoids. That thing in the middle is the simple version of fundraising the smart way, with the notion that if we look at the way donors behave, that gives us income, and income drives development activity, which drives more donor behavior. You with me so far? So here, some of my favorite things. Look up there at the Easter circle, yellow and purple. 53% of nonprofits don't have a strategic plan. Bad news. Now, one of our colleagues, Linda Lizakowski, and I, who wrote a book about the leaky bucket, a study called The Leaky Bucket, What's Wrong with Your Fundraising and How You Can Fix It, we think about half the people who said they had a strategic plan were lying, but let's not go into that. This was another circle down in the lower left-hand corner. 37% of the sample does not track their income. They may know what they raised at the end of the year, but they never set a target for it. So they could never say, we met our goal, or we exceeded our goal, or we didn't meet our goal. 37% people, what are you doing? And 79%, wait a minute, 63% rely only on total income, which is a trailing indicator. Everybody understand the difference between a trailing indicator and a leading indicator? I see a huge number of people saying, huh? A trailing indicator is something you can measure after the process is complete. So when we had the Great Recession and employment rates dropped so bad, when employment started to come back up, the economists say that's a trailing indicator. It means a lot of other things are falling into place beforehand, and the last way to measure it is, ooh, people have jobs again. Leading indicators are stuff that you can measure at the beginning or in the middle of some process or cycle. And they're real useful when you're managing a business process, in this case, the process of raising money. If you goof up at an early, if you see bad results at an early stage, an early leading indicator, it's much cheaper and easier to fix it than if you spend 6.5 years trying to get money out of Mrs. Moneybags who says no, right? You wasted all that time, you wasted all that energy, you wasted all that emotional suffering, you wasted a lot of money. So I thought that was like scary. But my all-time favorite thing, oh, these two, the whole bunch of little people and this thing here, people don't have ways to decide which donors are right for them. In fact, when Kent gave us that little exercise, name one thing, one obstacle to your success, Leora, who is sitting next to me, wrote, identifying the donors who may be the right fit. Does that, anybody else wonder about whether or not you're calling on donors who are the right fit? Yeah, I bet some of you are. Or if you're not thinking about it, you should be. My all-time favorite was this. The last statement in the leaky bucket, ta-da, is, what do you do? What are your standard practices when fundraising results fall below desired levels? Half of the audience said, write a whole bunch of grant proposals and throw a whole bunch of bake sale special events. This is called the Hail Mary pass of fundraising. I don't know what we did wrong, but we're really hurting for certain. So this is proof to me that we as an industry could be doing a lot more with a lot less if we fix these problems ahead of time. So when you talk about business processes, you talk about the elements of the process. And one of the elements of any process is the component of time. Now, unless somebody has a different insight on this, I know I'm getting old, okay? I mean, really old. It's depressing. But the last I checked, there were still only 24 hours in a day, right? Even though the moon is gradually going farther away or coming closer, I can't remember. So I wanted to do a little exercise. Recovering accountant Kent will probably recognize a term that's used in the general ledger called SG&A. It stands for Sales, General, and Administrative. And those are the costs that nobody can really identify, and they lump them into this one thing that sort of doesn't ever mean anything to anybody. And I decided to try and figure out what that meant one day. This was back when I was in corporate sales. And one of the items was the cost of sales. Parentheses, E.G. Cost of collateral materials, entertainment, that means taking your prospects to a topless bar. and gas and mileage, okay? I said, that stuff, it doesn't really accommodate the cost of sales. So we're going to do a little interactive exercise if I can figure out how to make this. I have to dump this for a second, okay, guys? Where's my other thingy? All right. What I thought was really a lot more interesting was what your time is really worth. You're going to get a live copy of this, okay? This is an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm also going to assume that we still have 365 days a year. Leap year doesn't count. And that we have 104 weekends in the year. So what we're going to do is figure out how many days in a year you cannot devote to prospecting, writing proposals, or schmoozing up your prospects and conducting stewardship with your current donors. You with me? Now, do not throw anything at me, because I'm telling you the assumptions in this spreadsheet are you work an 8-hour day. And you work a 5-day week, more of the same, and you take vacation. Yeah, right. So I want you to tell me, somebody tell me, how many holidays, and I don't mean how many holidays are in your employee handbook. I mean, how many holiday days are you really going to take? If you're an Orthodox Jew, that's about 106, okay? I'm Jewish, I get to say that stuff. So about how many holidays are we going to take? Somebody give me a number. Come on, guys. All right. See, the magic of Excel. Now, I'm going to give you 10 vacation days, whether you take them or not. Now, how many sick days? And these, again, not what's in the employee handbook. This is what you're honestly sick and you can't go to work. The kid's sick and you have to stay home, or the dog, and take care of the kid or the dog. Or you just can't stand it anymore, so you call in sick. How many days?
8.
Now, about how many days, usually you think about this in terms of weeks or months, so we're going to take it and extrapolate it to a year. How many days in a year do you have to devote to administration? You know, call reports and posting stuff in your CRM platform, and reports that go from you to the chief development officer, and from the chief development officer to the chief executive officer, and from the chief executive officer to the, you get it? And preparing for board meetings.
50.
50. Sounds realistic to me. Now, how many days do you devote to travel? This doesn't mean commuting to the office. It means schlepping across the country to visit the alum in West Kneecap, Tennessee.
Including the actual visits, or
just the travel? Just the travel, and this also is including travel to conferences and jazz like that. Somebody want to give me a number of days? Huh? 6 isn't enough.
20.
Well, I'm lying. We'll say 12. 250.
I thought about 150.
Ooh. She's kind of about half the time. So we're taking a lot of days out here. This is, we're going to, if we use Mary's number, we're going to end up in negative numbers. So I'll now readjust this and say 24. I get to do it because I have a machine here. Now, training, conferences, staff retreats, and the like. 5? Okay. You guys aren't getting enough education. Yeah, oh, so I'm putting in 10. Now, days that you devote to managing programs or staff. Chastity does everything, right? When we say 1 minute, one woman show, she's it. And you know, small nonprofits suffer from this a lot more than larger nonprofits. So let's throw in another 20 days there. Now, we always have what I like to call lost days. Lost days are the days where you have a great agenda planned and all kinds of wonderful things, and you have a flat tire on the way to work, and your kid calls and says, "Mommy, I forgot you were supposed to bake cupcakes." and you get to the office and an employee is having a meltdown, then there's a fire drill and the Wi-Fi goes out. We've all had those days, right? I have them far too frequently. So we're going to give ourselves another 5 days. So we're now down to 126 days a year. That's still actually pretty generous. But it's also pretty realistic, which means out of the 2,000 hours a year that Uncle Sam thinks you actually work, assuming 40-hour weeks with a 2-week vacation, about half of it is eaten up by stuff you can't, by time you can't use to raise money. So I'm now going to give all of you a $1,500,000 revenue generating target. What this figure, we call this the opportunity risk factor. Recovering accountant Kent will tell you that this is a meaningless phrase. I made it up. And it has no bearing in general accounting principles. However, it's a really nice metaphor. And what it says is, if you use up that much time on activities that have nothing to do with fundraising, and your job is to raise $1.5 million, every time you're in front of a donor, you put $1,500 of your target at risk. Every hour, you risk losing $1,500. You also risk earning $1,500, but the likelihood is far greater that you're going to lose that money. What do you think so far? That's why I'm giving you the spreadsheet. And by the way, this is a really great document to show staff. There have been some conversations earlier today about the notion that the CEO or the board chair may not understand how you used your time. Now the fact is, we can't take any time away from stuff like vacations and rest and sleep and weekends and sick days. We can't take, there's not much time to take away from prepping for meetings or travel either. If Mary has to travel over 100 days a year, what, she's going to stop traveling to see her donors? I doubt it. So they have, people who are not in the business need to understand there's a heavy burden, and the smaller the organization is in terms of staff, the heavier this burden is. And this is a great way to make a business case to hire more people in the development shop, boys and girls. So, I keep thinking this is a touch screen. Now here's the other factoid. Every time you invest one of those hours in a prospect that's a dud, and you blow the money, the remaining hours become more risky and thus more costly. So to go back to Leora's issue, how do I identify donors who may be the right fit? You don't have a lot of days or hours to waste experimenting that just because somebody said, talk to my brother-in-law, he's got a lot of money, that's not a great way to qualify your donors, right? How many of you have fallen into that trap? I'll tell you a little anecdote. We were hired by a very interesting organization in Palm Beach County, Florida. I live in Florida. And many of you may be aware that Office Depot was founded in Palm Beach County, Florida. I don't know if their headquarters are still there, but at the time, one of the objectives of the client was to engage us to do this methodological stuff and to write grants for them. I didn't do any of the grant writing. I hired a grant writer. So we decided to subject do a little research, figuring out which grants these guys ought to pursue, which foundations, which grant makers, and which specific grant applications. So Lauren, my partner, came in to the fundraising committee meeting at their demand, and she put a stack of papers down like this. And she said, this stack of papers represents all the foundations whose basic grant guidelines you guys meet. And then she put a smaller stack. We went from here to about here. And this represents a stack that passes the second round of qualifications. And this little stack represents the 11 grant opportunities we recommend pursuing this year. And they all said, oh, let us see that. And a bunch of papers goes cycling around the room, and one of the guys said, hold on a second here. You're gonna love this. What are you girls thinking about? Because I don't see Office Depot Foundation in here anywhere. Well, at the time, the Office Depot Foundation was in big trouble. The company was suffering, and anybody who ever did any work with Office Depot Foundation in South Florida knew if you wanted something from them, they'd happily pull up a pallet load of copy paper, but they wouldn't give a nickel of folding green currency to anybody, all right? So immediately the other members of the staff say, oh, pardon us, we're so sorry. I guess the girls didn't understand how important. And we said, hold on a second. Office Depot Foundation didn't make it into the top 10 because they don't meet our criteria for pursuit. And that's what I want to talk about next. I hope I can do this without totally destroying myself. Oh, great. Go on, Ellen. I usually pride myself on being a little more technologically savvy than that. Come on. No, it's infrared, honey. You don't have to point it at the computer. Okay, so I want to talk about the importance of measurement, and this covers a wide variety of things. The critical thing about instituting a measurement philosophy in your organization is you start somewhere, even if it's with an educated guess. The objective always beats the subjective, although you want to use subjective reasoning as part of this. I'll tell you about this as we go along. Evidence beats opinions. We had the evidence that the Office Depot Foundation was not an appropriate candidate based on the criteria that we had spent several weeks defining with our client. So this dude on the board had a different opinion based on conventional wisdom or popular wisdom. Our evidence beat his opinion. And finally, informed decisions beat the tactical frenzy. Now, just a word about that, because Ken was talking about it earlier. We have to free ourselves from the notion that it all has to happen in 12-month increments, all right? Just keep that in the back of your mind, because I'm going to be going into more detail about it as we move ahead. There are only a few things that you can measure directly. Anybody here ever have an annual performance evaluation? And what do they ask you about? Whether or not you were a team player and a cheerful soul, and whether or not you took direction well, and showed initiative, and all this stuff. Now, we certainly want our people to be good team players and have a lot of initiative and all that stuff, but you can't measure that. What you can measure is, you can only measure numbers, rankings, percentages, and ratios. Yes, no, always, never. There's some technical term for that, which I never remember. Deadlines, did you meet your deadlines? And turnaround times. So, in the process of putting together your measurements, remember you have to be able to observe them in one of these 5 ways. And making these decisions up front before you start thrashing around, kicking up a lot of water but never getting to the other edge of the pool, it's not helpful. So this is a little out of sequence because I wanted to talk about the broad lack of prospect qualification standards. This is broken up into the 2011 to 13, which is when we did our first benchmarking study, and then 14 to 16, which is when we rolled up the data for the second benchmarking study, which I still haven't written. And you'll see that the vast majority reported that they had preferences for defining the ideal donor, or they had no standards whatsoever. So preferences are lousy. My preference is not the same as your preference, right? There's no documentation here. And look at how teeny the purple chunk is. 6% or 7% actually have a documented profile of the ideal donor that includes capacity and motivations. And this is what Kent talks about so elegantly in Asking About Asking. You have to find out what their motivations are, because that's how you engage people. You do not engage people over the size of their bank account. You engage them over their motivations. If their motivations are a good fit for what you're trying to do, you have engagement. Then the capacity issue is almost secondary. And we also saw similar rates for acquisition practices. The biggest chunks are none, no targets, no standards, or, well, we encourage donor acquisition, unmeasurable. And retention, we all know how bad retention is as a problem. And again, no targets. Retention is encouraged. This is an empty recommendation. Or we don't even think about retention. So let's talk about how do we figure out who our ideal funder is. Now, Kent's 10-step, what's it called, Kent? The campaign staircase? Yeah, that, whatever Helen said. Kent laid out 10 ways to ask about asking. We kind of simplified the question. It's fairly easy to identify the level of capacity you would like your donors to have. There's great prospect research services out there that can tell you the wealth profile, their giving capacity, and their giving history. It's in your interest to sit down as a group and say, how wealthy do we want our major donors to be? So that's part of your ideal donor profile. The trickier one is, what do we want our motivations to be like? So we always recommend to our clients to do a little market research with your happiest, most loving, most devoted donors, because your ideal funders your ideal funder has to depend on you, whether or not your interests match their motivations. And you have to know what's on offer here. We talked about the Children's Hospital. If your donor is much more interested in the School of Music, they may not be motivated to support the Children's Hospital at the same level of giving. Does that make sense? It's so convenient to pick on the University of Iowa. And the last thing that matters is their capacity. Can anybody guess why I think capacity is not that big an issue? And why it's so important to understand option 2 in this list? Speak up or forever hold your peace. Say that again.
If they're not
Yeah. Oh, we have to go through this foolishness. Ta-da!
If they're not motivated and don't share your interests, then it doesn't matter what their capacity is.
Yes. Any other answers? Can you get up to the... Sorry to make you folks walk around so much.
They determine their capacity, you don't.
Exactly. Ken, you made an impact. But there's also another reason, boys and girls. And that is, when you do this right, your best donors tell you in their words what's important to them. And you can use that information in their language in all of your messaging. From social media to the one-on-one conversation. So when Kent says you want to hear more than you talk, I like to say we need to know what we're listening for. So we have a standard in that ideal donor profile that says our ideal funder is going to share these motivations. And they're going to demonstrate them in language like this. Does this make sense to people? So these are the 3 magic questions you want to get answered about your donors. What do they want to achieve with their charitable giving? Oh, and in the case of a corporate sponsor, what do they want to achieve for their businesses by investing marketing dollars? What do they want to avoid with their charitable giving? And how do they know they've chosen the right charity? Achieve means make a difference in the world. Keep children from being sick. Get kids out of the ICU faster. Return children to the playground sooner. That's what they want to achieve. What do they want to avoid? Early childhood mortality. Children suffering from, fill in the blank, whatever's scaring you. And how do they know they've chosen the right charity? That's a really interesting question, because if their demand from the charity they invest in includes, for $500, I expect you to name a building after me, and I want a daily report on, I want to see your 990s, and I want a daily report on how you spent every nickel of my $500 with receipts, maybe that's not a donor whose expectations you can meet. So as much as I agree with Kent about letting the donor make the decisions, if you have your own standards and they're documented ahead of time, your ability to select the right donors and use their language to attract them to you, so you're not just, again, shooting in the dark, It goes up exponentially in your favor. Any questions about this? There are some very disciplined ways to create the ideal donor profile, which we teach in Fundraising the Smart Way, and we provide you with an automated worksheet that says, oh, if they scored thusly against these criteria, they justify that much more or less investment of fundraising effort. So we know how to deploy our resources appropriately. Leora, you are the one who brought up that cool question. So I'm going to put Leora on the spot. Does this approach make some sense? Uh-oh.
Yes, it does.
Remarkable. So I'm going to give you examples of how we would see, what it would look like. So this is someone we will refer to as Hyacinth Gardner. And we are inviting Hyacinth to become involved with our botanical garden, our arboretum, okay? So what we know about our ideal donors in our arboretum is that they have a passion for gardening, and they want to see children get involved in gardening, and they're worried about habitat destruction and the decline of threatened species, and they're also worried that our garden, you know, the Iowa City Garden of Delights, might have to close its doors and sell the land to a developer. But they also said, we know, pardon me, I want just the right amount of recognition, not too much. A quarterly report telling me your results is going to be fine for me, and my name listed in the annual report will make me as happy as a clam. And good old Hyacinth wants a chance to volunteer. Now, I wanted to use that particular photo because Helen keeps telling me what a fantastic job the University of Iowa Foundation plays in stewardship. Give your best donors some flowers, please. Keep the floral industry in good order. So does this make sense? You don't just pull these ideas out of the air. There's a disciplined approach to having conversations with your best donors, which again have to do with, tell me about yourself. What life experiences have made you the philanthropist you are? What motivates you to give to charities? Which kinds of charities do you like to support? Why? Oh, and here's one I'll give you for free. Only if the donor is currently a donor. If our organization were to succeed beyond your wildest imaginations, what would it look like and why would that be important to you? And the flip side of that is, let's say we had to close our doors. Why would that be meaningful to you, and what would happen? Now, these are not questions to cultivate a donor. These are questions to help you identify the criteria of your ideal donor profile. We did another one for a corporate sponsor. Since the government has decided to abandon us, since the government has taken some very strange and unexpected steps, I think we're going to have to start calling on corporations. And when we're talking to potential corporate sponsors, we have to be thinking about their philanthropic principles, but also about their business interests. So what do they want to achieve? Typically, they're looking for brand trust. How do I make my trust more branded? My brand more trusted in my market? Show that I support the community. And we're looking for new leads. But we often find in the corporate sponsor market, the ideal donor profile, the avoid question, is more philanthropic. They don't want to see the local tax base erode. They don't want to see further declines in high school graduation rates and so on. And again, in this instance, the right partner for this hypothetical corporate partner is they share our values. That is, the corporation has certain corporate values, and they say our ideal partner shares those values, and they're good negotiators. I love dealing with corporate sponsors because they're used to talking about money all day long. They're not embarrassed by it. It doesn't freak them out. So if you're in the least bit reluctant to put that extra zero at the end of the sentence, go talk to a corporate sponsor. You'll get over it in a hurry. Now, so we're going to talk about metrics again. And Helen so kindly said in her opening program this morning that I was going to talk about tracking success. So now we're really getting into the heart of the matter. So to summarize to this point, don't just wing it. Craft ideal donor profiles. You can have one for corporate sponsorship. You can have one for major giving. You can even have a profile for foundation grants. One of our clients is the foundation of a celebrity in the hip hop world. And they actually have a specialized ideal donor profile for other celebrity donors. It's pretty cool. So what we have in your ideal donor profile is 3 sets of metrics. Do they match the qualitative criteria, which are all motivation driven? Do they match the factual criteria, which tend to be capacity driven? And do they not match the danger signs? We might as well, if we're going to write all this stuff down anyway, write down what you don't want. You don't want somebody who's going to come in and say, now, if you'd change your mission to this, I would give you bags full of money. Hopefully you won't do that. Well, maybe you would, but I wouldn't advise it. The reason I put this up under the notion of qualifying criteria, metrics, is that you can use a weight ranking method here. And you can say, so you can measure the extent to which the prospect meets or fails to meet these criteria. The final score is to find out whether or not the prospect ranks at the level of A. Because if your team is, remember, we don't have a lot of time and it's very expensive, right? Scarce and precious fundraising time. So would you want to see your fundraising team's book of business be C and D ranked? No, you wouldn't, because you're blowing money. So you're driving your fundraising team to concentrate on the most highly qualified donors, which Kent just talked to us about in terms of raising your expectations. If somebody's qualified to give you $50 and it costs you 17 hours to squeeze that $50 check out of them, you lost a lot of money. If they're highly qualified and they have the capacity, don't ask them for $1,000, right? So now we have a way to decide when we're putting our energy into the right donor and when we're avoiding the wrong donor. You can take money from poorly qualified donors, but you want to take that money from low-cost channels, direct appeal campaigns, online giving, crowdfunding, events. But you don't want the individuals in this room who I hope are earning a lot of money and who have very little time to pursue that $50 or $500 or in some cases even $5,000 gift. You can't afford it. Now I'd like to move on. First of all, any questions, or is anybody prepared to throw a tomato at me yet? You notice that all overripe fruits have been removed from the room. So far I'm making sense, folks? Okay. So now I want to talk about the opportunity pipeline. How many of you in this room are familiar with the phrase, the opportunity pipeline? Please raise your hands. Not a lot of people. Okay. So here's a little definition. The opportunity pipeline is a standard in for-profit sales organizations, an extremely useful metaphor. In effect, it is a simple checklist that tells you where a prospect stands along the arc of cultivation. Have you identified them? Have you partially qualified them? And so on. And I'm going to go into detail about this in a minute because this is an invaluable tool. And if I had asked that question in a room full of people from the for-profit industry, every hand would go up. When I got involved in nonprofits, I was sort of astonished that it's not that common. Furthermore, I'm horrified to tell you that I have yet to find a nonprofit CRM that has a useful opportunity management pipeline module. And so I'm starting my first software development project. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm too old for this. Okay, this is the opportunity pipeline. We start here at the big fat end of the pipeline. By the way, sometimes this is represented as a funnel. And we put a bunch of stuff in there, new opportunities. But at every stage, they're called progress stages or opportunity stages, we're going to lose some. Ideally, we'd like to be in control of our conversion ratios, which is how many we'll lose moving from step to step. We do want to lose some. And over here is the opportunities that come to fruition. And you notice that it's proportionally smaller than the stuff at the beginning. So does this make sense? That's a trailing indicator. Leading indicators. Trailing indicator. Now here's the thing. In anecdotal research and in our leaky bucket research, we saw that of the metrics people use at all, 67% of them rely on a trailing income only, indicator only, which is how much money did we deposit in the checking account. By the time the income comes in, it's too late to fix what went wrong. We've blown time and money we couldn't afford. We've pursued candidates unlikely to give, or whose gifts we would regret if we got them. So we really need to be looking upstream and fixing our process as early as possible. In the world of CRM, these are called opportunity stages, or as I said, progress stages. My mind is a little peculiar and it doesn't always work the way other people's minds work. So when these platforms first came out in the mid-90s, and I was still in corporate sales, I asked myself, This was my reaction to my first look at these, because they said, make a phone call, make a discovery call, give a demo, give a facility tour, give another demo, send a birthday card, give them a pet puppy. It's just like step after step after step after step of what you're doing. Right? This is, again, going back to Kent. Did I do this? Did I do that? Did I stand on my head? Did I do the happy dance? Did I spit wooden nickels? I thought, I can't figure this out, man. It's too complicated for me. So I said, The other thing that I said about was, Kelly and Helen and Petra don't like to do birthday cards. But Chastity and Patty love to do birthday cards. How do I make this standardized? And I had a eureka moment, or I took the wrong medication. And I said, aha, what if we measured the donor's response? What if we measured the donor's behavior, or I should say the prospect's behavior? And it turns out that this stuff is real easy to follow, it's unambiguous, and you can do statistical analysis on it. Now you have to understand, until the invention of the pocket calculator, I was unable to add 2 and 3 together and come up with the same answer more than once. So it really astonished me to discover I understand statistics. What a notion. So move number 1, these are called donor moves in our methodology. Because everybody, raise your hand if you've heard of moves management. I don't like it. And I don't like it because you can't do the statistical measurements. So donor move 1 is the donor tells us enough about himself or herself for us to decide they're worth investing further. In other words, do we like them? Do they meet our ideal donor profile? Move number 2, does the donor like us? Does he see our value, or does she understand what we're trying to do? So are we meshing? If we're not, that would be a great time to say, I'm so glad to know you, see you around the campus, and not pursue them any further. This is the lose their phone number move. Now, move 3, it says okays your proposal. What that really means, and this goes right back to Kent's 10-step staircase, did they express a willingness to consider making a gift? We haven't asked them yet. We've just asked, so we like you, you like us, would you be willing to consider making a gift? And at this point, we're not even asking about what size gift. I would love to meld Kent's 10-step process into this process, but the purpose of this process isn't just to teach you how to cultivate your donors, it's to teach the whole organization how to keep control over the productivity of the team. So after they say yes, they're willing to consider a gift, we give them a proposal, preferably following Kent's formula, whether it's a written proposal or how about a size gift. We give them a chance to negotiate the details. Is this what you were expecting from our earlier conversations? You should lose your donors at move 2 or move 3. If you get all the way to move 4, you probably didn't do as good a job at moves 1 and 2 as you could have. And if you lose them at move 5, either something horrible happened and Bernie Madoff stole all their money, or you did a lousy job at moves 1, 2, and 3. So almost invariably, if they get to move 4, you're going to get a move 5. But you'll notice the pipeline doesn't end there because we always want to retain our donors. So we put in expectations for the fundraising staff within a certain period of time, go back to the donor, and get some feedback from the donor. Are we doing what we said we would do in terms of keeping you informed? Are we meeting the expectations you had for us in terms of recognition? And then we go to move 7, get another gift from them, and move 8, get referrals from them or get them involved in your peer solicitation. So keeping the number of opportunity stages as short as possible allows you to keep records. I'm a big fan of summary reports rather than extensively detailed reports because they're easier to understand and they also reveal more about the functionality of the organization. So here's the punchline. Metrics drive growth. They allow you to do more with less. They measure efficiency as well as effectiveness. They drive your cost down while driving achievements up. And they provide the evidence you need to analyze and improve on a regular basis. How are we doing on time, Jen?
20 minutes.
Oh, goody, because I want some Q&A here. Now, we, in the SMART way model, by the way, SMART is an acronym for strategic, there are many ways to define this. Strategic, measurable, donor action focused, realistic, and time defined. I had to call it SMART because SMDRT is very hard to say. So we've got metrics in the scorecard, and we've got metrics in the pipeline. So for example, we could analyze pipeline progress by donor rank. And what we found from observing the performance of our clients is that it takes a lot longer and costs a lot more to get a smaller gift from a begrudging donor if the donor ranks C. If the donor ranks at an A, you get a larger gift faster, and they love you. What's not to like? And then we get to the analytics part, where we can really get into the details. Are we filling our role of donors with highly qualified donors? How much time has to elapse between one move and the next at certain levels of gift? One of the most important things that we do in the pipeline under ideal circumstances is we keep track of how much money we're bringing in every year from philanthropy, but we always keep the pipeline at about 2.5 to 3 times as much of your income target. So if we're in the last week of the year and you have achieved 110% of your annual assignment, hot dog. But the first week of next year, if your pipeline is at 20% and it really needs to be at 300% of your target, you're going to waste an awful lot of time at the beginning of the year refilling the pipeline with opportunities. So this stuff, in the parlance of business process management, this approach is what's referred to as a management control system. You, as an individual contributor, can use these kinds of tools to keep you on task and on target, focused on the right population, and doing your best work. If you're at a higher level in the organization where more people report to you, you can keep the whole team focused and on task and on target. And that's a good thing. We've talked a lot about Helen's new book on volunteering for the genius and Kent's wonderful book, Asking About Asking, and my book, Fundraising the Smart Way. But there's a whole bunch of books you might want to read one day. One of my favorites is First Break All the Rules. A great book about managing people. And the first thing that they talk about is the employees need to have very clear, defined expectations. Do I know what my expectations are of me at work every day? So deploying a model like this solves that problem. It makes it a lot easier to manage. It also creates clarity of expectation throughout the corporate hierarchy, from the individual agent or peer solicitor all the way up to the board of directors. Everybody's in agreement, they get it, and you can demonstrate your progress. So, to summarize, here's the point of it all. First of all, if you're gonna lose anyway, lose early. While the donor is in charge of his or her expectations and needs, and it's our job to listen, it's also our job to keep our organizations healthy. So we need to say what our measurements need to be. We therefore need to embrace the notion of measuring and keeping track of those measurements. We should make sure that our team is properly equipped, whether it's a volunteer or a peer solicitor or a member of the development committee of the board or a fundraising professional who's actually getting paid, God forbid, that we are investing more of our human effort into funders who meet your criteria for excellence, for engagement. And it's imperative that you're able to demonstrate your understanding of their motivations, which is why this idea of going out and talking to some of your funders, your happiest funders, the ones who love you the most, and asking them these questions like, why us? You know, what motivates you to give? Why do you keep on giving to us? Helen has told me she's been giving, although she's not a University of Iowa alum, she's been donating to the university for how long? 35 years, because their stewardship is exceptional. They're calling her all the time, not to say, Helen, raise a gift, but to say, here's what we did thanks to you, and and how are things going, and how much we appreciate you. You have to be able to demonstrate the value you offer. How do you demonstrate the value you offer when you're terrified that the utilities company's going to cut off your electricity and there's a hole in the roof? You don't go in and say, oh, poor me, we're needy. You go in and you share your results. If you guys aren't tracking your results, let's just say you should be. So you can demonstrate the value you offer. You want to be talking about your impact. Track your progress with the opportunity pipeline. This is really important, especially if your objective is to find new funders or to ensure donor retention. You've got to look at that pipeline regularly. If you're an individual contributor, you probably ought to be looking at it every day. If you're a manager, once a week, once a month is plenty. But you really, what I know we all do is we get all excited about, donor X, the new opportunity, and the initial meetings were just wonderful, and then you get busy, right? And you forget, and 17 weeks later you say, oh my God. Accountability is a key element here. You can't hold people accountable by flogging them, or embarrassing them, or telling them the board won't like them, or threatening to fire them. The only way you can really create an atmosphere of accountability in a business environment, and remember, fundraising is the most business-like of all business disciplines within the nonprofit organization, is by saying, these were our expectations, this is how, in metric terms, these are our actual results, let's read the story these numbers are telling us. Because maybe we have to adjust our performance targets up or down. And finally, continuous improvement, which, by the way, isn't an empty slogan. It refers to specific techniques for evaluating the data. Is the data, are we seeing desirable results or undesirable results? If you ever say, did we see good results or bad results, I'm flying in from wherever I am at the moment and slapping your face. Because results are never good or bad. They are desirable or they're undesirable. They're data. And then we kind of peel back the onion and say, did we attain, first of all, maybe a result comes in that's much lower than you expected, but your end achievement is still perfectly wonderful. You set your target too high. But you want to learn techniques like root cause analysis and the plan, do, check, act cycle. Sounds really snazzy, and I'm deliberately not going to define them. I have to have some mystery in my life. And looking at the data and analyzing it, saying, what's the story these numbers are telling us? Is it the story we want to see? How could we see a better story? So this is just a little bit about fundraising the smart way. It's about a 6-month engagement. We work with organizations. We are capable of working with organizations all over the world, although some of the more obscure languages we haven't found interpreters for yet. And we can work with individual agencies, small groups of agencies, or large groups of agencies. So I would love some feedback because we still have 5 or 10 minutes, I think. Comments or questions? Let's use the, somebody has to start. Do I have to pick on somebody? Come up to the, yes, Andrew. It's Andrew, right?
That's right.
Hey.
Andrew with PBS.
Remember, we're recording this for posterity, so you don't just get to sit there.
I do on-air spots for Pledge, so I'm used to being recorded. What's this
for voiceover?
What's this? Yeah, not voiceover work. What's the size? You said 3 times your limit. Would this kind of? I mean, I have maybe 300 major givers, but we have 3,400 members who are quote unquote annual givers. I'm wondering, can you apply something like this to 3,500 people in your annual giving program, or is it confined to major giving?
This actually isn't the easiest question to answer. When we get into details in a pipeline, you really shouldn't be putting small gifts individually into your pipeline, because it's inappropriate to assume that for a $50 annual donation or $10 a month, whatever it is, you're going to go through that whole process. So we have to record somewhere what our expectations are going to be from the membership income as a whole. And if membership income has always been at X, or you're getting 10 bucks a month from all 3,500 members, and you want it to get to Y, or you're getting whatever it is, then that's more a marketing question. How effective is the marketing? So keeping the details of the pipeline at 2.5 to 3x the dollars, not the number of gifts. Now, I also think it would be useful to keep track of the total number of gifts, because you don't want to have one big, fat, gigantic gift and 17 measly gifts, because then you're vulnerable.
So how do you identify then the segment of your annual givers that are going to go into the pipeline? So wealth screening, or?
This is, you're going to really hate me for this. You make a guess.
Metric driven.
Just make an educated guess. Don't torment yourself. If your current average major gift is $5,000 this last couple of years, maybe you want to drive for $7,500 gifts. My advice on this is keep it as simple as possible. You don't have to torture yourself over wealth screening, and you just decide how big is a major gift and how many of them do we want. Is that helpful?
Thank you.
Anybody? Oh, please don't make me sit here and feel like a flop.
Do you want to describe, because I think it's hard to visualize, when you have the pipeline donors?
Wait a minute. Where's our?
When you have the pipeline donors up in an Excel sheet, what you have on one side, try and visualize it, it would be over here for you, is you're going to have the 300, the amount that is 3x, whatever your goal is. And you're going to have all the stages up above, and as these donors who are listed, and their grades are on there too, are moving through that
the continuum.
Right, the continuum, the process. You know where they are, and you know exactly where you've lost them or if they're continuing by looking at it, by simply looking at the Excel sheet. And with the formulas, it'll automatically, when you get a gift, it'll put it in the gift column and total it, and it'll take it out of the 3x column, because of course you can't count it both places. Once it's out, either when it drops out or you get the gift, it comes out of the start of the pipeline total. So you know exactly where you are at any given time. And I know this was verbal and you didn't see the graphic of it, but once you see it.
Note to self, keep the graphic in the presentation.
It'll make sense to you. It's incredibly easy to read and accessible at a glance.
Thank you, Helen. The problem with speaking last is people are leaving. Any other questions? Any comments? Any words of wisdom? Any rotten tomato? Did this meet? Patty said she was looking for a book like on a topic like this. So Patty, did this meet? Let's get Patty to talk. Let's make Patty talk.
I did say that, thank you. Absolutely.
Why?
I'm excited to go back. I have had, truthfully, a really crummy week of lots of no's and lots of fear expressed by donors about the political climate and will we be in business, yada, 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 yada. And I was thinking, truthfully, this morning, gosh, I really should be in the office because I gotta figure out who to go to next. But I'm so glad I came here, and I'm jazzed. We're gonna go back and make a pipeline, and then we're gonna make some new ways of asking people to help support our public library. And for those of you in Iowa City, yes, after we read the books, we'll put them in the library collection so that you can borrow them and we can all learn and make our community better. So, thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
Let me just say this about because, you know, politics is in our face all the time. I've lived long enough, God knows, and been through enough fundraising. There is no good time. There is no bad time. It just is. These people that you are going to have the brains to have made money, no matter what the economy was, enough that they can give away.
Something.
Let them make the decision. That's it. Your job is to connect with them and find out what their values are and how your values meet them. And it'll go around and around and around. So stop worrying about that. Things will happen anyway, no matter what we say. They aren't going to stop for us.
We'll live through it. You have something to say, Leon.
I'm not smart enough to ask you a question at this moment.
Yes, you are.
So I just have a comment. But we're with Tammy and I are with a small fundraising organization for a specific event. Mm-hmm. And you've taught us so much that I have to go home and absorb it. I think, and figure out how it fits in, because it's so great, because it's such a unique perspective in my head, because I'm not the numbers person, but we have a numbers person. So I appreciate it, and that's why I'm not asking a question. I'm not smart enough to ask it. I just got to go home and look at it and give it to somebody else. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen is one of our certified facilitators for Fundraising the Smart Way, and during her training, I wasn't even thinking about how do you apply this model to a specific bounded thing, like a ride or an endurance event. And one fine day, Helen says, "Oh man, this would really work in a capital campaign." And the little light bulb, ooh, cool idea. So I'm a big fan, because I grew up in sales, that it doesn't sort of matter. There are marketing campaigns, and there are special campaigns to raise money for this, or the shingles and the roof and the grant for the research to buy the electron microscope. But at the end of the day, you got to just constantly fund your operation. And if there are fluctuations in your need for funding, then you address them. Does that make sense? Good. Well, I am very honored by your feedback and really humbled. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you so very much, Ellen. Lots of thanks today to Helen and to Kent, to Tom DePranger, who helped me with the welcome. Certainly Kevin and Donna Grunike for their generosity to help make this possible today. Kelly and Katie from the Center for Conferences at the University of Iowa that helped me make this a reality and put this on today. Certainly to all of you attendees for taking time out of a very busy schedule, carving out time to invest in yourselves, in your own learning. And so I just really appreciate you doing that. And lastly, all of you should have a business card of mine in your folder, and I would just encourage you to reach out to me. As I just finishing up my second semester teaching in the certificate program, and 2 of the 3 classes that I teach involve the opportunity to partner with nonprofits. And so having learning opportunities for students through kind of utilizing your organization as our client and us producing materials and other types of products for you. And so you'll hear from me, I'm sure, in the coming months, but I would also just encourage you to reach out to me also. So thank you again for attending the Fundraising and Philanthropy Communication Conference. Have a great weekend.